Morning, everyone. Thank you all for those kind words. And let me start first, also offering my congratulations to UNRISD director, to UNRISD staff across several generations, and the broad community of UNRISD partners and supporters on the occasion of the 60th anniversary. And I want to emphasize UNRISD community because UNRISD cannot be summed up by its actual institutional setup. Anniversaries are not only the time for celebrations and recognition, but for reflection, looking in the past for building the future. UNRISD was born at a time of when the struggle for independence was at its peak in colonial territories, the start of the Cold War, so multilateralism wasn't at its best then either. However, a context, very different context, characterized with a strong belief in development and social progress and better future. Today, we have a more crowded international scene with many more actors and institutions in local and global governance scenes, a history of development and social development and progress rich in lessons, in diversity of pathways, in conceptual and policy thinking, political leadership, but unfortunately, again, broken cooperation, polarized discussions, and viewpoints amidst, I must still emphasize, continued dialogue and commitment, and the great consensus that our planet and people need global solutions and cooperation, if no agreement on how to get there. The history of UNRISD and ideas circulated through UNRISD can be approached from several vantage points, from the vantage point of its institutional history, the context and state of social development, the thought leadership inspired by its prominent and renowned economists and social scientists that have led UNRISD as directors or crossed its path as chairs or members of the board. UNRISD has attracted many different profiles from government, policy leaders who have been in government or became civil servants after leaving UNRISD, from researchers and thought leaders across regions with close links of role with policymaking, from international organization, and that has obviously attracted a lot of brain power and the belief in the need and the role for autonomous research, ideas, alternative thinking that UNRISD represented and represents today. We should also recognize the contribution of several generations of researchers, in-house staff of UNRISD, but also those partners and collaborators in academia and outside that have contributed occasionally but consistently and proudly, I should add, over the years and decades to generate the outputs and outcomes in this vast area of social development. Indeed, UNRISD has developed a unique model of partnership and collaboration and cross-fertilization of ideas that have made of UNRISD a unique actor in the UN family and in the global governance of social policy, an influential actor in the international Geneva ecosystem that has now expanded activities in Bonn, Germany, as well as in Madrid. Reporting to ECOSOC in New York with multiple and numerous partnerships in Africa, Latin America, Asia Pacific, and Europe over the years. This array of interactions have generated many personal and human histories with a small h or stories of attachment, commitment, collaboration in the vast domain of social justice, social policy, and social development that's surpassed by far UNRISD's size and financial means. I came to know UNRISD in the 1980s when I joined ILO and worked on the issues of gender equality, poverty, and rural development. And those interactions using UNRISD as a sounding board, as an incubator of ideas, as an ally, a staunch critic, though, of orthodox views and promoter of alternative thinking. But always UNRISD kept an eye on the scientific soundness of its research and with the objective of influencing policy and paradigms. It wasn't research for the sake of research. We wanted impact. For today's remarks, I have chosen, instead of institutional memory or history, or through its prominent scholars and research collaborators, to focus on 6 themes or ideas, which has been entirely a personal choice. I could have selected 60, but I will say just a few words on each of these 6 themes that I find have been marked by the research and the findings of UNRISD. The first and overarching theme is, of course, the notion, the concept of development. Not social development only, but development. Different concepts of development have been developed, incubated, discussed, analyzed by UNRISD research over time. There was a period where in the initial days of UNRISD, where the focus was on development and modernization, that equation. And UNRISD attempted to explain why modernization was such a complex and sometimes contradictory process, and why development planning did not always have the intended effect. These are some accepted facts now. But in the 60s and 70s, when these statements were done, they were really going contrary to the strong belief in linearity of development. There was also a lot of work done by UNRISD on development and poverty eradication. That was the main theme at the time I joined ILO, especially a focus on poverty through agrarian change, through rural and green revolution. And this was also another mainstay of UNRISD's focus, green revolution. And why do I mention that today? Because at that time, UNRISD drew attention to the polarizing effects of new technologies and the need for a critical role of institutions in determining the impact, the diffusion of the technology, and showed how in situation of sharp social inequality, the introduction of new technologies, in this case, these were high-yielding varieties, as you know, tended to marginalize small farmers and undermine their customary means of livelihood. You can extend this discussion to this current new wave of technological discussions where there are no regulations, no governance mechanism, no institution that would fairly distribute the gains of productivity or regulate from the excesses of the market dynamics. In some, these were just a few colleagues, but a few ideas, but in some, UNRISD has, through its work, encapsulated the complexity of development, the elusive notion of linear pathways to development, the importance of who is engaged and how is engaged in the development planning. There were programs on people's participation that may sound something of the past, but it resonates very much with the participatory, democratic participatory development at the local level that we are promoting today. So in sum, UNRISD provided a macro picture of social policies and social systems inside the development paradigm and their implications at the micro level with a comparative lens. It also showed that there isn't a single pathway to development, and that local conditions mattered, policy mattered, and commitment mattered. The second issue that I wanted to raise, but I have alluded to it already, was placing the social at the heart of economic policies and political economy and political choice. Social cannot be considered as a derivative, unintended consequence of economic policies and political choices that need or can be fixed by targeted approaches, but rather that social has to be placed at the heart of the economic strategies. So UNRISD, I think this is best illustrated maybe in one of the landmark publications of UNRISD in '95, which was entitled States of Disarray, the Social Effects of Globalization. So development under globalization. And we knew the disenchantment on the social level that globalization process has brought, and until today we feel the impact. And UNRISD argued for a need for a systemic and structural approach, and the fact that social cannot be regulated and managed at the local level, national jurisdictions, while economic and financial flows and policies are internationalized or liberalized. And UNRISD argued that and showed that there is always political choice, but that policy space had been shrinking as a result of globalization and financialization of the economy. The same line of systemic thinking and structural thinking represents current work that UNRISD has undertaken on inequalities and the flagship report that we published last year. The third, and I will be very fast on the other issues, are, I would be remiss if I don't mention UNRISD's work on indicators of development, measurement of social progress and well-being in general. And we know how vivid that discussion is even today. UNRISD has been at the forefront of proposing, revising, criticizing several generations of indicators as a necessary tool to draw policy attention, to monitor progress, to assess deficits, and to plan interventions. This work at the origin of UNRISD was linked to the development planning and how to overcome the scarcity of data and indicators, in particular in developing and newly independent countries. But also we know that the complex discussion around SDG indicators today show the importance, the complexity, evolution in our understanding of pertinent indicators to measure well-being, to measure growth or not measure growth beyond GDP, and especially how do you measure human security and social policy. Fourth, very important area that needs a proper discussion on its own, gender equality, work on women's intra-household position, division of labor, but also in society, in economy, has been one of the mainstays analyzed, evaluated throughout the years by UNRISD, from the different approaches to women in development, gender and development, to today's focus on gender and identity. The UNRISD has provided a venue for research and debate, including bringing together to weigh in this discussion very important feminist critical thinking. And as we have noted, the backlashes on women's rights in the recent past, in the current situation, including in very advanced economies, another proof that progress in these areas are not linear. Fifth, ecology, nature, human interaction with the environment have been on the UNRISD agenda since its beginning. Although this wasn't the terminology that was used, but there was already at the origin of UNRISD concern with desertification, with drought, and the consequences for hunger, for diminishing livelihoods that have been analyzed by UNRISD throughout the years. And obviously now the eco-social contract is at the heart of UNRISD's efforts. It is interesting to note that the recent meeting in Paris on environment with the leaders, they have come rounded the circle saying that fighting poverty is back in fashion as a concept. Fighting poverty is the other side of the coin of environmental transition and low carbon economy. So I really think that brings together these two from the origin and the current challenge. Across the above themes, the approach of UNRISD has been vis-à-vis social policy, comprehensive, multidimensional, analyzing complex interactions, interdisciplinary, privileging the universal, systemic versus targeted approaches to fix social vulnerabilities, rights-based, embedding the notions of justice, but also of solidarity. Finally, the last issue I want to raise is not a theme, but how this policy and research interface has been approached by UNRISD over the decades. Academia and policy interface, governments and research interface, civil society research and policy interface. Not easy to manage, but UNRISD has tested throughout the years several methods, evolutions in the thinking, how you connect, how you interact, how you build capacity, how you influence policies. The role of UNRISD as a place of convergence of alternative innovative research and thinking on social policy. The prominent thinkers, leaders, researchers, and many more bottom-up grassroots researchers who have circulated their ideas through UNRISD as a channel of outreach and dissemination with the convening power, but also the power of evaluation and synthesis of debate, with direct links with policymakers and leaders, at the same time being able to engage critics of the same policymakers among academia and civil society, and forging alliances with progressive social movements. These efforts, these activities have gone well beyond what I said at the beginning, the institutional size and financial needs of UNRISD. UNRISD sometimes has been at the origin of these ideas, but many times as amplifier, enabler, convener of dialogue through its power of synthesis, of evaluation, re-evaluation of policies and debates, alongside UN institutional dialogues and international conference. I still recall the parallel debates that were organized by UNRISD during the first social summit in 1995. And I think that the same we should be planning, looking ahead for the next forthcoming summit. Looking ahead in this challenging context, it's obvious that the quest for development with social and ecological justice is as pertinent today as any other time in the rich history of the last 60 years. The old paradigms have suffered a major blow of credibility and efficacy, including for their proponents, if not completely abandoned. The new paradigms are shaping amidst, as always, tensions, debates, ideas for reform of a new financial architecture, among others, of measurement of progress beyond GDP, of just environmental transition are emanating from so many different quarters and think tanks in the global south and the global north. There is a big space and opportunity for UNRISD to further contribute to reinvigoration of good old ideas for just distribution and diffusion of technological innovations and productivity gains, re-evaluation of strategies for a new eco-social contract. In the build-up to the forthcoming summits that I mentioned, we will have the SDG summit, followed in principle by the Summit on the Future, and as announced, the Social Summit for 2025. So I look forward to today's event as a start of this important conversation, thinking on the issues, strategies, and partnerships on how to promote social justice in a world polarized by multiple crises, how to reinvigorate the mechanisms and dialogues of international cooperation and multilateralism with social policy at its heart. It's an invitation to all parties and partners to take advantage of this anniversary 60th celebration mapping to examine, explore, come to a consensus. What are the 1, 2, or 3 ideas that we want to take to the social summit and for previous negotiations before that? But we all know that summits are not just opportunities to get together and have resolutions, but that is to bring and lobby for ideas that can make a difference in the future. I also call on the broad UNRISD community and international development community to fully support and enable UNRISD to fulfill its role through predictable and stable financial contributions to tackle the next generation of social development policy issues. Thank you.